Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to Talk Like a Leader. This week's episode is titled Feedback Sandwiches Usually Taste Bad. And by the title of the episode, you can probably tell that I don't have a super high opinion of the feedback sandwich technique for providing feedback for people. The idea for this episode, in fact, comes from a number of conversations I've had in Bud to Boss workshops, in DISC training workshops, in coaching technique workshops, in work with private clients, and a whole host of situations where either workshop participants or coaching clients would ask me the point blank question, "Hey, Guy, what do you think about the feedback sandwich?" And my answer is always, I really don't like it. So first, let's talk about why I don't like it, what I see as a problem with the technique. And then I'll offer some quick thoughts on what you could do to do something a little bit different that I think is going to have a better outcome for you. So here's how the feedback sandwich is typically taught. Provide someone some positive feedback, then give them some negative feedback. Sometimes in literature or in discussions, I've heard this middle step, the negative feedback step, described as criticism. And frankly, I have the opinion that there's really no such thing as constructive criticism. I won't go into that topic right now. Just think about those two words, constructive and criticize. They just don't go together. And then you follow that constructive criticism or that negative feedback with a positive feedback statement. And I guess conceptually it's intended well. And I think it's offered with the best of intentions, frankly, from people who teach it and try to apply it. The problem is that it just is rarely executed well. And first of all, there's some structural issues just conceptually with the idea on its face. If you really dig into human behavior, human communication, human motivation, those kind of things, and think about how the feedback sandwich plays into these ways people tend to perceive things, especially when they're on the receiving end. So there are some structural issues with it that get in the way, even if it's done perfectly well. And it's rarely done perfectly well. It's usually done poorly. So we start with a technique that has some flaws, I'll highlight in just a minute, and then we apply it badly. And it tastes bad to the receiver. It rarely has the intended outcome. Unfortunately, there's also this issue that it's been taught and talked about so much that it's in the common vernacular. So we attempt to do something that's really, it's a technique rather than a mindset. And my general philosophy is that mindset matters more than technique to start with. But it's a technique that's been taught and talked about so much that virtually everyone knows what the feedback sandwich is. And so if we use that strategy, they can kind of feel it coming. And then it feels inauthentic and not genuine. It feels more like a setup for the delivery of negative rather than genuinely offered positive feedback on the front and back end that happens to have some negative wrapped in it. So it just doesn't taste good. It tastes bad to the recipient. Now, from a structural standpoint, I mentioned there are some structural issues with it, and I'll start with the ratio. Most of the data that I'm aware of says that because human beings tend to focus on negative in terms of when we think about interactions with other people, the internal voice most of us have, it tends to gravitate towards negative for most people. So it becomes a challenge of a 2-to-1 positive to negative ratio, hoping that it lands somewhere around neutral, when for most people, they probably need 3, 4, or 5 positive interactions to have some emotional bank account with you so they're ready to receive the one negative. So we start with a flawed ratio that even though there's more positive than negative, there's not enough more positive to overcome the negative. I mean, think about this idea. Let's say you and I work together, and through the course of the day, I make 2 positive comments about things you've done. And I also make 1 negative comment. Let's be honest. What do you remember when you go home? What do you ruminate on? Where does your focus go when you've had 2 positives and 1 negative? If you're like most people, you're going to fixate on the negative, and the 2 positives are as if they never happened. So the ratio is wrong. It's typically delivered wrong. It just doesn't go well. And when you think about what really happens for most people, When we're attempting something like the feedback sandwich, what we really wanted to do was to deliver the negative. So the two positives on either side of it wind up being sort of contrived, vague, not very specific, maybe not even real, maybe not as connected to performance as the negative. And so the positives are not often in the same range of validity in terms of how the receiver hears them. They don't have the same specificity. They don't have the same focus on behavior. They're not as clear. They're just dressing on a negative feedback comment. So for all these reasons, the ratio is wrong. The technique has been taught a lot. People basically hear it coming, and most of us don't pull it off well anyway, because the real intent is to deliver the negative. We're just trying to dress it up. And because we're just trying to dress it up, the two positives often wind up being vague and not very specific, while the negatives may be very specific and very pointed. And for all these reasons, the feedback sandwich usually doesn't go well. And usually, from the perspective of the person receiving the feedback sandwich, tastes bad. And because it tastes bad, it rarely results in positive outcomes. Now, would I argue that you can never get positive outcomes using the feedback sandwich? No, I would not argue that, because I can't actually say that anything related to human behavior and communication is a perfectly bad or perfectly good technique in all situations. I will say in general, though, in most situations, with most people, feedback sandwich isn't going to go well. I'll accept that maybe on occasion people will have some good success with it. I just haven't seen that it works out most of the time. So I would say, let's ditch the feedback sandwich. It tastes bad. It's not very authentic. It feels contrived, even for a person who's delivering it. Let's find another way. And so what can you do instead? Well, what I would suggest is, rather than look for pleasant ways to deliver negative, shift your focus to delivering positive feed forward. Now, I'm not suggesting that you never provide negative feedback. I'm not suggesting that you never address behaviors that are egregious or really, really bad. Just want to be honest, that thoughtful, and consider that in most situations, the kinds of things we're trying to give feedback on are not egregious. They're not terrible. They could just be better. And so we want to shift our focus away from telling people what they did wrong and what they need to fix, and to what can be done better in the future. I'll even acknowledge that done poorly, with the wrong tone of voice, the wrong timing, the wrong word choice, even positive feed forward can sound like criticism to the person receiving it. I just think it has a better likelihood of being received well, and probably a bit easier to practice for the person delivering the feedback. So if you want to deliver negative feedback, if you want to help people improve, and I think really the point of coaching is to help people improve, to help people do better in the future. It's more about getting more of the good behaviors people bring to work than it is about getting less of the bad ones. So if we keep our focus on getting more of the good rather than on getting less of the bad, we can put our attention on what can go better next time rather than what went badly last time. And really, if you really want to think about it, feedback and coaching ought to be a conversational thing anyway. We want to take our attention off of what message do I deliver, and really, how can I have a conversation with this person about how things could be better together in the future. Maybe there are things I can do. Maybe it's not totally on them. Maybe there are things you can do as their supervisor, as a leader for the team, to provide better resources, to provide clear instruction, to provide better tools. I don't know. It's worth considering, though. So if we make coaching conversations more about conversation than delivery, and focus more on what could be done better next time, rather than what went poorly last time or what not to do next time. If you can shift your focus off of the feedback sandwich, trying to dress up the negative, if you can look for ways to comment specifically and clearly about the good things people do on a regular routine basis without saving them until you need to deliver a negative. Build up an emotional bank account with your team of goodwill because you've been willing to point out what they did well. When the time comes, because it's going to come eventually in all relationships, when the time comes to talk about corrective actions or improvements, you're probably going to have more leverage, more traction with the person, and you can probably just get right to the point because you've already built up that goodwill. You don't need to try to manufacture it in this moment. If you'll do that, build goodwill on a regular basis, comment on what people do well, recognize and reward people as you go along, build an emotional bank account. And then when you do need to correct something, get to the point, talk about it. Don't beat around the bush. When you do that, though, focus more on what could go better next time rather than what went poorly last time. If you can do that, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.